It's go time, friends. Happy Monday. Welcome to Downtown Rotary. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to invite Dave Eastland up. Oh my gosh, we're gonna do the four-way test. Then I'm gonna invite Dave up. You ready? Okay, I've got you. Please join me in reciting the four-way test. Of the things we think, say, and do, first, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? Fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? I would like to enthusiastically welcome Dave Eastland up for our invocation.
Thank you. Please pray with me if you choose. Dear Lord, we thank you for all the blessings you have provided for us, including the opportunity that we have to gather, to learn, to discuss, and to share love and respect for each other as we all continue to grow, understanding that to those whom much has been given, that much is expected. Please help give us the awareness and direction to help fulfill that responsibility. We ask a special blessing for those who are diligently working to help the homeless, and especially the homeless as they deal with issues most of us have never come close to experiencing. We pray all of this in your name. Amen.
You may have noticed a familiar face missing today. Angie Kuiper is not with us, so I want to extend an extra special thank you and appreciation to our greeters today. I think they did a phenomenal job, really held down the fort very, very well. I also want to take a moment to do guest introductions. We don't get to do this every single week, but today I think we will. I'll like to start with Matt Paulson. Matt, you have a guest.
Thank you, President Cindy and fellow Rotarians. I'd like to introduce Rebecca McKeever. Rebecca is the software development lead at Merkouris, so please welcome Rebecca.
Brianne Maynor, you brought a guest.
He's in the buffet line.
Oh, no.
I'm Brianne Maynor. I'm president of Startup Sioux Falls, and I am pleased to have Amos Belo, who is our brand new community coordinator with us today. So enjoy your lunch.
Welcome, 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 welcome. Laura Arnett, you brought a guest.
Yes, thank you, President Cindy, fellow Rotarians. I apologize for my voice. My son was sick last week, and now, of course, I have it. But I am pleased to have Michelle Garrigan here with me today. She's an entrepreneur and owner of Firelink Digital Marketing, and she is becoming very engrossed in Sioux Falls, so I wanted her to come experience Rotary today.
Glad to have you. Thank you for being here. Laura, thank you for inviting her. Tom Simmons, you brought a guest.
Thank you, President Cindy, fellow Rotarians. I brought with me today my wife, the gracious Lady Mary.
Did I miss any Rotarians who brought a guest? Okay. Then we shall welcome our junior Rotarians, Carson Weiner from Sioux Falls Christian, Nancy Peter from Jefferson, and speaking today will be Sam Bondra from Lincoln. As we've talked about, and we will each week in the month of November, it is Rotary Foundation Month. And to highlight Paul Harris Fellows, I would like to invite Eric S. Erickson to the stage.
Thank you, President Cindy. Hello, fellow Rotarians. This being Foundation Month, last week you saw a video about As One Ministries in Uganda, and you're going to hear more about that next week in the way that we as Rotarians, as a service organization, can contribute to a great mission that is going to happen early in 2023 that is in Uganda in partnership with the Rotary Group in Uganda and with As One Ministries and with Hope Haven and hopefully with you. As part of you contributing to that trip, you'll have another opportunity to make strides towards your initial or subsequent Paul Harris Fellowship. And we've had so many new Rotarians that it occurred to us that some of us don't even know, I hate to say this even into a microphone, don't even know really who Paul Harris is. And so this is a chance to not be embarrassed at the next Rotary Mixer and say you don't know who Paul Harris is and you don't know what a Paul Harris Fellowship is. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Paul Harris, and I want you to look around at your table. Those who have a bit of a gold touch to their badge are part of the Paul Harris Fellowship, which means they have contributed at least $1,000 to the foundation. So after setting up his law practice in Chicago, Paul Harris gathered several business associates to discuss the idea of forming an organization for local professionals in Chicago. He envisioned a place where professionals of diverse backgrounds could exchange ideas and form meaningful, lifelong friendships. So in 1905, Harris and 3 of his buddies met in downtown Chicago, and that was the very first Rotary meeting in 1905. He led the club, and they actually constructed the public toilets in Chicago in 1908, and that became their first service project, therefore making Rotary the very first service organization in the world. So Harris, he was kind of a big thinker, and people didn't always agree with him, but he did want to have Rotary spread across the country and the world, and not everybody agreed with him, but eventually Rotary sprung up all over the United States, and in 1917, they formed Rotary International, and then they formed the Rotary Foundation. And the goal of the Rotary Foundation is to advance world understanding, goodwill, and peace by improving health, quality education, improving the environment, and alleviating poverty. These are the kinds of things that you as a Rotarian take part of just because of being in Rotary and by contributing to the Rotary Foundation. So in 1947, Paul Harris died, and his death prompted an outpouring, a real outpouring of gifts to the Rotary Foundation from people all over the world. And so 10 years later, the Rotary Foundation decided to come up with the idea of the Paul Harris Fellowship, which recognizes any Rotarian who has given at least $1,000 to the foundation. And each time there's another $1,000 given by that same Rotarian, there's an additional level put on their Paul Harris Fellowship. So we have Paul Harris +1s, +2s, +3s. So if you are not a Paul Harris Fellow, it's more than just a designation that gets you a different colored badge or a little pin, which I couldn't find mine today. It's important. It's an important place. I can't remember where I put it. I want you to consider, as you hear from as you hear from Steve and Kayla next week about the opportunity that we have to support a grant to bring wheelchairs to Uganda, that maybe some additional motivation might be for you to help you reach your first or next Paul Harris Fellowship level. So I wanted to recognize the Paul Harris Fellows that we have in our club today. We have 107 Paul Harris Fellows in our club, which is really good. We have 31 who are multiple Paul Harris Fellows. So first off, if you are a Paul Harris Fellow today and you're with us here today, could you please stand up and let those who are not get a look at who's contributing? Thank you. So there are some very famous Paul Harris Fellows. Jimmy Carter was a Paul Harris Fellow. Boris Yeltsin is a Paul Harris Fellow. Jonas Salk is a Paul Harris Fellow. And while the list of singular Paul Harris Fellows is too long to name off, I do want to point out those who are +1, +2, or even more than that. So Rotarians of Sioux Falls Downtown Rotary who are Paul Harris Fellow +1 include Tom Bosch, Bill Byrne, Dana Dykehouse, Dave Elson, Rich Gary, Doug Hayek, Phil Haig, Boyd Hopkins, Anita Keeley, Ralph Linder, Jack Marsh, Kathleen McGreevy, Milton Much, Sharice Alland, Jeff Scherschlick, Al Schoeneman, Tom Simmons, Dave Stadheim just received +1. We'll be hearing about that in a couple weeks. Steve Statz, Lenny Stolk, and Darla Van Rosendale. Those who are at Paul Harris Fellow +2, which means they've given a total of $3,000 or more to the Rotary Foundation, are Sandra Christensen, Greg Lafayette, Michelle Lavalle, John Nordley, Matt Paulson, and Donald Scott. +3 are Tom Dempster and Douglas Pay. +4, we just recognized him in July, is Joel Dykstra. And then we skip up to Paul Harris Fellow +8. And who would you guess is Mr. Rotarian at Paul Harris Fellow +8? That is our own Steve Sikorsky. Thank you, Steve. So Steve is also what's known as a Paul Harris benefactor. He means that he's indicated in his estate that he'll be contributing to the Rotary Foundation when he goes. And so just, it's something I remember when I started as a Rotarian, I didn't fully recognize the value of the designation of Paul Harris Fellowship. But when you consider the mission of the Paul Harris Foundation and all of the things it contributes to, including the eradication of polio, finding clean water, all of these great things that the Rotary Foundation does around the world, this is our one way to really make a personal investment into those efforts. So you'll hear more about it in the next couple of weeks. Be sure to be here next week and hear all about the upcoming opportunity we have to contribute to the mission to Uganda. Thank you.
What a wonderful celebration of philanthropy in this room. I'm grateful for every single one of you. We get to do a new member induction. I'd like to invite Olivia and her new member this way.
Thank you, President Cindy. Good afternoon, fellow Rotarians. I am so excited to introduce you to one of Rotary's newest members, Jody Collars. Jody joined our team at Sioux Empire United Way as the Major and Planned Giving Director back in January. And she has quickly become one of my favorite people, and I'm so excited to share her with all of you. She is someone that I really lean on and trust in the business world, which, as you all know, is very important. And I think that she will make an excellent member of Downtown Rotary. So please help me join me in welcoming Jody Collars.
Good afternoon, Rotarians. Thank you to Olivia for sponsoring me. Thank you, President Cindy, for having me. I'm so honored to be a part of this distinguished group, and I can't wait to get started as a Rotarian.
Kayla Etram, I'd like to invite you up to introduce our junior Rotarian.
Good afternoon, everyone. We get the chance to meet Sam Vondra from Lincoln High School today. Sam is involved in Student Council and National Honor Society. You may have seen him because he works at the customer service area at Shields, and he has interests of airplanes and snowboarding. He is looking to study aerospace engineering in the future and would love to be an aircraft systems engineer after that. Please help me welcome Sam Vondra.
Hi, everyone. So as Kayla introduced me, I'm Sam. I'm a senior at Lincoln High School this year, and I am the current publicist on the Lincoln Student Council, and I'm also the president of the Spirit Point Regional Student Council Board. So last week, it was kind of ironic for me listening to Laura as she got introduced say that this was really an elite group of people, and it reminded me of what I've gotten to be involved in over the past few years. At Lincoln, we really pride ourselves in what our student council is and the people that get elected on. It is another elite group. I mean, obviously within a high school instead of a whole city, but to us, it means a lot. It's super difficult to get on. I've discussed the election process with students from all sorts of different schools, and ours is much more involved, whether it's the application process you go through, the discussion the advisor has with teachers and with other students about each different individual that's running, it's difficult to get on, not to mention the fact that there's 3 or 4 times the number of students running every year as there are spots available. We really do get to have the best of the best on our council. And obviously within Lincoln, it's already a top tier group of kids. So it's an honor to serve there and to be welcomed here. As a student council, every year we're involved in service, similar to how Rotary is. We volunteer through the banquet multiple times a year with Feeding South Dakota, with Lifescape, and also in creating tournaments and stuff for kids to participate in within our own school, and raising funds to donate to all sorts of different places around Sioux Falls. So like about a month ago, we had a volleyball tournament that we ran, and we raised just over $1,000 that got donated to Special Olympics to help out with getting different people to compete there. I know none of the members of the council are here or advisor to hear me say it, but I just wanted to say thank you to everyone that I've gotten to be involved with there. It's seriously is a great group of people. They've pushed me throughout my entire high school career to be the best individual that I can, whether it's in the hallway, in the classroom, in everything I do. We all push each other and take pride in really being great individuals in our day-to-day lives. And I wanted to say thank you for everyone here for having me as a junior Rotarian for the month.
I'd like to now invite our panelists and moderator to the stage while they make their way. I want to take a moment to remind you that this is the last week to register to serve alongside other Rotarians at Feeding South Dakota on Monday, November 21st from 1:30 to 4. The last count is that 15 Rotarians have already volunteered. I want to extend my gratitude to each of you for spending your afternoon doing that good work. We have room for a couple of more to join them. So if you want to volunteer, the sign-up sheet is back there, or you can sure email Angie. Everybody looks ready. Today's program is about homelessness in Sioux Falls. I would like to thank our panelists, City Councilor and the Homeless Task Force Chair, Rick Merkouris, Homeless Task Force member, Anny Libengood. Did I say that right? Well, I want to do it correctly. Anny Libengood. And no stranger to our stage, Sioux Falls Police Chief, John Thum. Board member, Eric S. Erickson, will be moderating today's program. I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, fellow Rotarians, and thank you all for serving our city and for joining us here today at Downtown Rotary. The Sioux Falls City Council adopted a resolution on June 7th of this year, establishing a homeless task force to study homelessness within Sioux Falls and to make policy recommendations to end homelessness or reduce homelessness over a 10-year period. The 13-person task force, which is chaired by City Councilman Rich Merkouris, had their first meeting on August 3rd of this year. They had a total of 7 meetings, some subcommittee meetings, where they heard from people who have firsthand experience with our homeless population. So the task force developed and adopted recommendations that will be shared with the City Council a week from tomorrow at their informational meeting. So today's conversation with these 3 individuals is going to be more about what they've learned through the task force process, what they've learned from those who have contributed to through the public input period, and some of what the next steps are. And if we can, we'll allow time at the end of our discussion for questions from Rotarians. So first, I wanted to start with Anny Libengood, and I had to practice a few times too. Anny has been a social worker with Minnehaha County has spent 17 years there, roughly, at Minnehaha County, a member of the task force. And what is it, Anny, about your experience as a social worker or anywhere else in life, any other place that you've served that you felt would help you contribute to the task force? And maybe anything we need to know about current homeless situation in Sioux Falls?
Sure, thanks for having me. So I worked almost 18 years with homeless population, people that were homeless or potentially going to be homeless, low-income folks. I wanted to share just some quick stats with you because I like numbers sometimes. But right now, the Sioux Falls School District has identified 650 homeless kids. Last year, the ending number was 1,097. In the state of South Dakota, our Native American population makes up 9% of the population. In the state, 78% of the homeless are Native American. And I thought that was an important stat to share, especially with the work that we're doing with the task force. Every year in January, our state conducts a 1 year or a point in time count of how many homeless folks we have in the state. And those numbers you can find online, but for last year, we had 1,108 adults and 281 children, which those numbers are usually pretty low because it is dead of winter in South Dakota. I wanted to also just quickly share, I know that we don't have a ton of time, but it probably goes without saying that, being homeless is hard. But to truly understand some of the complexities of how impossible it really is without somebody to help you through it or the resources to help you through it. I worked with a 69-year-old man whose apartment flooded in Sioux Falls, and he ended up living in that apartment with standing water, mold, that kind of thing, until he was eventually evicted because he withheld rent in the incorrect manner. So he came to me and he needed subsidized housing because he was only living off of $800 a month in Social Security. And subsidized housing is housing where you pay rent, it's based on your income. Well, in Sioux Falls, if you needed to apply for subsidized housing, you would get a stack of papers about this thick to apply for the different apartments that he would qualify for. And he had arthritis, tremors, and blindness. So obviously filling out this kind of paperwork wasn't going to be easy. So we worked through it, and eventually we ended up getting him a place to stay or place to live. But he did have to see him break down in a landlord's office crying about, just giving him a chance to have a house was really humbling. But I just wanted to share that story because it is really hard to get out of homelessness.
Thank you, Annie. Chief, I think we'll go to you next. Chief Thum has been our chief now for a little bit over a year, been with the police department for over 17 years?
Round up, yeah.
Round up, all right.
Yeah.
And clearly when many of us, speaking for myself anyway, when we think about homelessness in Sioux Falls, we think about seeing a panhandler, seeing folks in the park being talked to by the police department. And so I think we need to address that right up front. Can you just talk about maybe some of the laws, some of the interactions of your police department, and just if it's the right thing for police to fix or something else?
So I'm just going to go a different direction, not too far though, so I won't stray us too far off path. So as my time as a police officer, I've appeared on numerous panels, and even just a year ago, when a question on homelessness would come up in a multi kind of group panel, the indication for everybody in the room was to look at me, right? And I think one of the great things this task force conversation has done is push the broader angle of what homelessness is for our community. Because I can speak to the mental health and addictions that we see on a daily basis, but I can't talk about the 69-year-old struggling with rent assistance or the families or kids that are in a different situation. I think that's just a great place to start and not look solely at law enforcement, because I think we kind of get the most of the attention, because what's one of the main things we see for the average citizen or resident that sees homelessness, they see that panhandling sign. So that's been the recent topic of conversation, and to look through and what exactly people's rights are, their First Amendment rights, their ability to participate in that activity. There's really only a couple of ordinance violations as far as being aggressive or going into traffic, which really qualify, but it's well within their rights or their legal ability to stand and ask for money. And I think where panhandling becomes, where we focus most of our attention to, it just becomes one part or one visual symptom to a bigger issue that we're feeling. And we could take this a variety of ways from what we deal with, which really is driven by addiction and mental health on a day-to-day basis. You talk about those park interactions. And again, it's kind of educating the community is our job too. We would get calls about, hey, there's people laying in the park, there's people sleeping in the park. You police should do something about it. Like, well, that's their right. That's the right to be in the park. It's not against the law to be homeless in a park or homeless somewhere else, right? There's fine lines of when that becomes a police activity, but it is not a day-to-day police activity. Just to look at that, people don't like to see it necessarily, but it becomes that. So we're always with this discussion, but I think where we've come a long way as a community in 2015, 2016-ish, when there was a lot of issues at Heritage Park, a lot of what you heard from the police department is, well, we'll come in and we'll enforce everything that we can and we'll take care of this issue. Well, we've really been able to change the conversation and say we can't enforce our way out of these issues. These are bigger issues. Like I said, one of the main drivers for police calls, again, back to the addiction, homelessness, that we can merely deal with the symptoms with. We need to partner with other people, have a faceted approach to really make inroads, but just understand how difficult those inroads are to make sometimes.
Thank you, Chief. We'll get back to you, I'm sure, in a few of the topics. Rich Merkouris is the at-large member of the Sioux Falls City Council. He took office in May of this year. He's also a senior pastor at King of Glory Church here in Sioux Falls, and Rich does everything. You see him everywhere. I was researching this. I mean, I see YouTube videos from several months ago of you being asked, what will you do as a city councilor? And even during that time, Rich, the idea of a homeless task force came up. So a month after you were in office, the resolution was passed by the city council to start a homeless task force. So what is it that you saw was so important to do this in your first month of office? And what do you expect from the members who are on the task force, from the city council, now that you're going to make some recommendations? You know, there's only so much time, but maybe you can summarize that.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having us in the conversation. The goal behind the task force was really to say, hey, at this point in time, what clarity can we provide of how is our city going to intentionally engage with the issue of homelessness? And after conversations with the mayor and other city officials, it became clear that there's been a lot of work done and there's a lot of work going on. But at this point, there wasn't clarity really of where's the city providing leadership. And so after consultation with the mayor, we decided that, hey, right now would be a really good time to sit down. Let's get a group together for a couple of months and let's identify 3 to 4 tangible things that we can unite around as a council and administration and say, we're going to do these things right now to impact homelessness over the long haul. The goal was never to end homelessness. The goal was not to develop a 50-page document. The goal was to say, right now, here's the intentional steps that we're going to take as a community. And so on the task force, we had the opportunity to get people like Annie, who's got the most firsthand knowledge in the whole city, is right here with the issue of homelessness. And I fully mean that. We brought in other members as well that had experience, such as Sioux Falls Thrive, that are on the thing. We brought in 2 individuals that have been homeless, and then a couple of city councilors. So tried to garner a variety of perspectives and say, what can we do right now? And to steal a line from the mayor was, let's make 1 degree of difference. Let's focus on making 1 degree of difference right now. So that's been the focus, and been thankful for everybody's work and the specific recommendations that we can bring forward.
I thought I could list off the names of the task force. Rich is the chair, Carrie Benz, Mike Curtis, Michelle Erpenbach, Dustin Haber, Anny Libengood, Terry Liggins, Andy Patterson, Jesse Schmidt, Marshall Selberg, Kurt Sale, Rebecca Wimmer, and Caden Whitman. I may be wrong, but it seems like we've had a homeless task force in the past. Is that the case?
In 2005, I believe there was the initial homeless task force, then that started what became the Homeless Advisory Committee. And then when the new administration came in, they really changed from the Homeless Advisory Committee to the Accessible Housing Advisory Board and kind of shifted the focus of that group. There's been different studies done at different times. We've either always had a standing committee or some sort of task force in place. This task force was really started to say, let's be narrow and let's be very time specific for right now. So it's not a standing committee that's going on, but the work has been completed for right now.
So Andy, as you sat in the task force meetings, what is it you heard from public input and even conversation among the task force members? Anything surprise you? Anything stand out?
No, I don't think there was anything surprising. What stands out, I guess, was the amount of business leadership or businesses that we had come in and give their opinions on different things. I guess it was surprising about how much empathy the downtown business owners had, you know, after sharing even all of their issues. They had a lot of empathy and wanted to help and even offered financial support. So that was, I thought that was great to see.
Did you find that those who came to the task force had maybe a solution in mind that they would be funding with that, or was it just, hey, anything you can do, here's some money?
I don't think they had specific solutions. I know that panhandling, of course, was a big one, and maybe some loitering. But as the chief said, we really can't police our way out of homelessness or poverty, and which is why we talked about this street outreach team that Rich is probably going to talk about here. But people need to build relationships with other people that need help and be able to offer them and guide them in different resources that are available.
Yeah. John or Rich, anything that you heard in the committee, either the task force itself or public input, that stood out to you?
You know, I was invited to talk to an AP class at Washington High School who was writing papers on this topic. And within writing their papers, they cited some South Dakota public broadcasting stories where that group was quoted in a story about how they were looking at these different issues. And so what I think I want to just like highlight that is that even outside of this meeting or this task force group, we've created a new line of information or new dialogue for young people in particular to start talking about and understanding the complexity of these issues as they're still young, as opposed to waiting well into life to say, oh, maybe this isn't just as simple as get a job or find a house, right? And that's I think sometimes the simplistic view we look at it, but to push this conversation outside of the task force, I think is one of the good things I've seen come from this.
Yeah, good, thanks. Rich?
I don't know if there was any surprises outside of, I think that we saw a lot of people come forward, kind of two perspectives. One was a real passion for people. You saw a lot of individuals come to give public input, or nonprofit leaders that, you know, came to tears a couple of times, sharing stories that a genuine concern about people. And we saw that in everybody that came forward. So that's one perspective. On the other perspective, we did see some genuine concern, and I've heard it personally, over the 8th Street corridor and the impact on the downtown community. And so I think that it wasn't overwhelming, like the business leaders weren't like, fix this so our businesses can expand. At the exact same time, they were saying, hey, we're concerned about our businesses expanding, but we're concerned genuinely about people. So I think it was nice to hear both concerns, the genuine people concern and also the economic concern of our downtown.
Annie, you talked about some of the statistics around homeless. What's the current number you feel that there's an unofficial or an official count as far as people who are considered homeless in the city of Sioux Falls? Does anybody have that number?
I don't think anybody actually has that number. We can, I mean, obviously we know how many people are staying at the shelters, but we don't know how many people are doubled up. And that is the majority of our state's homeless population because of our weather, obviously, I think is a big one. So I don't think anybody actually has that number.
Well, and it led me to this question then. It seems like at this time of year, capacity in our shelters is something that comes up. And Rich, Annie, John, anybody that wants to talk about that, how are we doing as far as capacity for people who need a safe place on a cold night like tonight?
So you probably heard the talking point out of multiple things. Bishop Dudley Hospitality House has a fire capacity of 155. Their actual capacity is probably around 100, and they've been multiple times over 155. There was a lot of conversation about this issue, and admittedly, and have said, there's a lot of division over this issue as well. There was a hard push by many to say, we need to start another shelter. Others of us said, hey, starting another shelter is a heavy, heavy lift. It sounds like, hey, let's get some volunteers together, have a little warming shelter where they can come on the coldest nights. The reality is you end up with the toughest individuals coming to that place. You need trained staff that can interact and engage. And right now it's difficult to staff our existing shelters, let alone adding another warming shelter. I think one thing that's really come forward from this, the county has done a great job and continuing to do a good job. I think they've put the foot on the accelerator even a little bit more here of trying to engage interaction between our existing shelters. So the county's ultimately responsible if an individual calls at 8 p.m. at night and their shelter's out of capacity. The county staff has to find a shelter for that individual. I think the county, Carrie Benz, has been working really hard right now to get our shelters communicating, doing a good job of saying, hey, you can go here, you fit their rules and regulations. So I'm really encouraged by that. Many people are still going to say we've got a capacity issue, but what we've been saying is this: let's work on some of the longer term things and hope that that creates some capacity rather than maybe starting a second shelter right now. That's going to start a third shelter, start a whole bundle of other issues that we might not be able to solve. So that's kind of the focus and where we landed at the moment.
Did those organizations, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I
Chief.
was just going to piggyback off that real quick because we've had an emergency shelter with capacity for years now. But I can tell you my career in law enforcement, we've found deceased individuals frozen to death on the street. And because it was the alcohol abuse was the primary thing that led to that. And so if we don't transition people into either a new housing situation or get them off the streets, again, just opening up more capacity isn't going to help those underlying issues that where we're seeing the tragedies at. So you have to be able to respond to that. And again, the task force recommendations are spot on that. Efficient capacity management, along with investment in transitioning people to a level of stability and a point where they can thrive, should give us capacity.
So rather than just providing more places for our homeless to go, starting more at the root cause of their homelessness. Right. And so, Annie, you would describe your one scenario, and for any of you to answer, I think we can imagine some of the situations that lead to the homeless situation that we have, or as far as any individual situation that they become homeless. Is there a way to even paint a picture, like general, is it always addiction? Is it mental illness? Is it all of that?
Go ahead.
Okay. So and you might have heard the story from me when we were in the task force, but one night after the task force met, I was driving home and there was a gentleman that was passed out on the sidewalk on the corner. His head was propped up against a pole and he had the cardboard sign that just said, "Help me." And I had called law enforcement before for a welfare check, and it didn't go well for a lot of different reasons. They're not social service providers, right? So I didn't call. I actually pulled over and asked this gentleman if he needed an ambulance, if he needed some help. He kind of came to and just first he said yes, but then I think he just was embarrassed and he said no. And I said, "Well, are you hungry?" He said yes. And so we went over to the frying pan and had some, I don't know what you would call it, a nightcap, but it was, we shared some eggs and, he talked about trauma and loss and addiction, relapse. He just kept talking. And I just listened. And I asked if he wanted to go to the link to get connected to try again. And he just said, "You have to want it." He didn't want it at that moment. But if we have a street outreach team that can actually engage that fellow maybe over and over again, at some point he's going to say yes. That's the hope anyway.
I think real quick, how I describe it to people, our homeless community, I would say there's three buckets. One bucket is we've got substance abuse and mental health challenges. One bucket, we've got generational poverty, homeless issues. In another bucket, we've got circumstantial issues, flooded basement, fire, lost job, whatever. Oftentimes in the circumstantial bucket, people want to move forward. They just need that hand up. These other two buckets of generational poverty, substance abuse and addiction, it's not just a hand up, but there's also healing that's got to take place. There's a process that has to go through. So it doesn't break down a third, but if we can do a really good job helping those who are circumstantially homeless move up, and if we can provide the services around these others, we can create the capacity to help one another. So that's how I describe the homeless community overall in our community.
It's a great way of putting it, Rich. And so, naively, sometimes we think we can just throw resources at something and it'll make it better. And this is years ago. I was a sergeant, and we identified within Heritage Park a group of refugees that were struggling with alcoholism and housing and jobs and everything that went along with it. It was this emerging population. So Lutheran Social Services, Multicultural Center really took the lead on this along with our help. And we got them together, group of about 6 individuals, worked on housing, got housing taken care of, got jobs taken care of, got everything in place that we thought we needed for support. Within 2 weeks, everybody was back in the park because we couldn't provide the support for the addiction issues, and we couldn't provide for the trauma issues that they'd experienced. And those were the root causes of what was driving their issues. So with our best intentions, putting all our efforts in, within 2 weeks, it had pretty much flamed away. And that's where we really have to have time. And to piggyback off what you said, I think there's a story of a gentleman that went to the link. At the 55th time, he was ready. We can be frustrated by the fact that 54 times he said no, but we have to keep the services there and keep the opportunity there for that 55th time when they're ready. Because you're right, it does take that decision too, and we have to be able to meet them where they're at. So really complex, but again, the buckets is a good way of looking at it. And some of these buckets are really hard to deal with, and we have to acknowledge that.
So the goal of the task force was to come up with a list of recommendations on how to reduce homelessness in the city of Sioux Falls and to submit those recommendations to the city council, which they'll do next week. So you adopted your recommendations a week ago today at your final meeting of the task force. This is the point where we get into some of the small bets that we'll make into what might be a reasonable thing to do to address the pipeline of homeless that are coming into Sioux Falls and living here, or we're living wherever. So first we could start with, by the way, siouxfalls.org/homeless is the website where the task force has listed all of their meeting notes and the videos from the meetings, and this list of recommendations is also there. You can download the PDF. So first off, promote an intentional, proactive, healthy approach to engage with our homeless. I'm just going to run through a couple of these and we can talk about them individually. So promoting an intentional, proactive, healthy approach to engage, the key word being engage with our homeless there. One was to contract for a street outreach team, which a couple of you have even mentioned the concept of a street outreach team. I'd love to hear about that. And then a public education campaign, even Chief, that you talked about panhandling and healthy approaches to helping. So Rich or Annie, you want to talk about first off the street outreach team?
Yeah, one of our first recommendations, I think that'll get the most publicity, is this concept of a street outreach team. This is not a new idea. I've spent time in Rapid City, Minneapolis, and I'll be in Denver actually in 3 weeks looking at their models as well. It's a model done in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Salt Lake City as well. One of our biggest challenges is our law enforcement's doing a great job, but they're covering everything in our city. And so we want to recommend saying let's contract with a nonprofit entity that would send out teams of people, probably 2 or 3 at a time, and go interact with individuals that are on the street. Our goal is to lower those 911 calls so we can create the capacity and the margin for our law enforcement community, but also send individuals who are trained to interact with people who are struggling. So for example, in Rapid City, they've lowered police calls by 1,500 over the last year through a thing called the Journey On program. In Salt Lake City, they've lowered by over about 2,300 in a 1-year span by sending trained teams out to interact with individuals. The thing that stuck out to me the most in interacting in Rapid City and watching them and shadowing them was this. The individuals truly knew how to interact with people who are on the street. Many of us get uncomfortable because there's individuals who are different than us, or uncomfortable because of alcohol or drugs or mental illness. These individuals are trained. They know which questions to ask. The biggest thing that stuck out to me was they said, sometimes it's the third conversation that the person says, hey, I want some help. Other times, it's the 76th conversation that the person says, yes, today I'm ready. But it's that time and time again, engaging with individuals and trying to get them connected into the continuum of services that we have in our community. And so we'd like to start a 2-year pilot project, judge it by data after 2 years and see, did it lower police calls? And secondly, did it get more individuals into a continuum of care in our community? So did we keep going to Frank and Frank never took advantage of our system of care? Or after 17 visits, did Frank start taking advantage of our system of care? So the street teams is one practical thing that has a financial impact for our community. That's one of the recommendations.
Within that street team, so would this be an organization that exists already that would come and bid on a contract, or would it, do we know what that would look like?
We don't know yet. Our hope is that it's an existing organization that's got experience working with the Native American community, experience with trauma-informed and peer-to-peer strategies. That might mean it's 2 or 3 different organizations, but the task force has said these need to be priorities. You have to have experience working with the Native American community. You have to understand trauma, and you have to understand peer-to-peer support. We don't need Rich Merkouris submitting an application to do these street teams and dreaming something up. We need people with experience and the understanding.
Yeah. And you specifically pointed out experience with the Native American population too, where 9% of our state is Native American, homeless was 78%. Annie, something else that would be required in the recommendation for a contracted street team is that they become part of the Helpline Center's network of care. Can this is an actual related to the Helpline Center that you're familiar with. There is a software system, kind of like a CRM or an ERP, if you're familiar with a management information system, that allows organizations to become part of the Helpline Center network of care to communicate on a person's behalf. So if I come in and I check into an agency, now they have access to the Helpline Center network of care. Is that not currently being done, information being shared between organizations that help homeless?
Yeah, so the 211 is the admin for the Helpline Center network of care. I guess the past few years, they've been trying to recruit agencies to participate in the network of care. We don't have everybody. We don't have some of the big players. We have a lot of different agency silos, and that's why I think this idea first came about, was trying to get the agencies to work together and share information so that we can provide whole person services to the individuals that we're serving. So yes, it is out there, but we need to recruit more.
Yeah, I would just make a quick comment if I could on this. There's a lot of board members sitting in this room today of a lot of nonprofit organizations in our community and government officials. If you could do one thing as a board member today, you return and you call your executive director immediately and you say, is our organization using the Helpline network of care? And if we're not, why are we not? We talk all the time in the city about collaborating, breaking down silos. Well, you can't put a bunch of kindergartners together and say, hey, everybody, get along. You got to put Legos in the room and say, hey, build something with these Legos. The best way to create collaboration among our nonprofits and government is to say, hey, here's a tool, start using this tool, that tool will create collaboration. So one thing you can do as a board member at your nonprofits is just go in there and fight like heck to get your nonprofit on that Helpline network of care. Call your government officials and say, hey, we want our government agency using this database, so we're sharing information. Sorry, I'll stop.
No, that's a good call to action, Rich, because usually we end these meetings with what is it that we as Rotarians can do to help with this cause. So if that's one, we'll commit to it.
Yeah, I think the tendency is to like look at our organization and look at the good work we do, and let's be proud of that. And that is a good thing. But like anything that's really, really complicated, it requires a collaborative approach to solve those issues. And I always say in the Upper Midwest, we're uncommonly good at it. I can tell you in law enforcement how we interact with all our different partners. We cooperate with everybody. There's no turf wars. I think we kind of need to make the same sort of mentality within our nonprofits about how maybe we're strong where one is weak and how we work together to really tackle issues and not just pat ourselves on the back about how good we're doing. Because ultimately the measure is how good is our community doing as a whole and how we work together in those issues.
So that's kind of one of the combining a couple of the initiatives that the task force came up with, contracting with the street team, making sure they're part of the Helpline Center network of care. I think we could come back to the other one, which is the public campaign for public awareness on loitering and the laws around how to help in a healthy manner. Any ideas on what that would look like?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of ways. I mean, but really, we try as a law enforcement now to be really open and honest about what we can and can't do. And we try to put that out there and hopefully with some public service announcements, really educate the public too, because what people forget is, I mean, we've all traveled to big cities before. And I think, I remember as a young person, I went to Chicago and the person was like, hey, people hit you up for money, always offer to buy them food. That's a good litmus test on what they want with your money, right? And so we as Sioux Falls have talked about it a lot, but we forget we're the regional center of everything from commercial, medical, and everything in between. And people come from all over. And when they see somebody on the side of the road, their heart wants to give out. They want to give out some compassion. There's just other ways to do it because the reality is a lot of where that money goes, it ends up going towards feeding addiction. And that's where we just have to be really blunt about it. I know it becomes kind of controversial, but the more we do to educate the public, and again, for me, that advice served me well as a young person in Chicago. If somebody asked me, I'd say, hey, I'll come buy you food right now. And what's that look like for you as an individual or people? Because I think, especially at the interstate points, we have people coming from all over the region. And even if Sioux Falls is giving to charities and giving to different issues, people visiting our community are going to want to be compassionate. That's kind of the nature of the Upper Midwest. So how we really communicate on how they can best apply their resources and really educate them on the issues.
Typically, when we think about services being provided to someone in our county, it seems like it's the county's job or the county's responsibility. One of the initiatives or the outcomes from the task force talked about a housing first strategy and working together with Minnehaha County. Can someone describe the idea there?
I think what we want to do is want to see the council and the mayor reach out to our county and see if we can formalize a working group together to take what we've learned with the Safe Home. So for example, many are familiar with the Safe Home, which was a little controversial in Sioux Falls 10 years ago or whenever it was established, this idea of saying, hey, let's get people housing first and then let's deal with the issues. Many times in the Midwest, we say, hey, get a job, stop drinking, and then we'll get you a place to live. The reality is this, until I've got a safe place to live, I can't work on those other things. This is agreed upon across the country in many communities, and we've learned this at the Safe Home. But we built the Safe Home. City of Sioux Falls is continuing to grow, and we haven't necessarily added more Safe Home capacity or things like it. We don't necessarily want to build another Safe Home. We want to say, can we take that principle and that mentality of housing first, providing those wraparound services, and build more capacity throughout our community? So I want the mayor, city council, and the county commission to have some formal conversation around that and see where that goes. The county, again, has been carrying a heavy load for many years. I believe the city and the county, this is a partnership. County's got the whole county they're taking care of. A lot of the driving force of a lot of these issues is the city of Sioux Falls. So let's work together on this 50-50.
I'd seen that described with something other than housing first being, if you're saying get a job and get cleaned up before you come and we'll put you in a house, it's kind of like seeing someone in the middle of a lake drowning and saying, learn to swim and then you can come to shore. So this housing first is a little bit of a paradigm shift, and I can see where it would be met with some resistance because you're making an investment of a housing unit for someone who hasn't necessarily gotten help with their mental illness or gotten help with their addiction. So I look forward to hearing more discussions about the housing first. What was the community, Rich, that you had referenced? It was a good example.
Houston's been the one that's probably been referenced the most across the country.
Since we have just a couple of minutes, we have about 8 minutes left. Perhaps we can grab that mic, Brian, if you have. Oh, there you go. Good, great. Thank you, Andrew. We'd open it up to questions from the Rotarians in the audience. While the mic is getting run over, there were a few other things, reviewing the existing loitering and panhandling ordinance, really looking at that, continuing to look at that as a recommendation. Other things looking at shelters, Native American graduation rates, how easy it is to get identification as a homeless person, mental health services, and also talking about our families who are considered homeless. So those are other things on the recommendation list. Go ahead, Governor.
Yeah, Dennis Dugard. The question I had related to the one-day count. I like the way Rich divided the group into 3 buckets because that made it simplified. The question I have is when the state or whoever does the one-day count, what are the categories there? For example, I think I'm guessing children's in, battered women are in that count. The children that are there are in that count. Are the children that are in foster care that don't have a permanent placement, are they in the one-day homeless count? Who are some of the groups that are in the homeless count? Because I think when people first think of the word homeless, they think of the panhandler. Somebody they can see in the street, oh, they don't have a place to sleep tonight. They're on the street tonight. Who are the groups that are in that 1,000 number count?
So HUD will define homelessness differently depending on what program you're talking about. For the point in time count, they're only counting people in shelters, people unsheltered, or people in motels that are paid for by an agency. If you're in a hotel and you're paying for it yourself, you're not counted. If you're doubled up in someone's basement, you're not counted. foster care, I'm not quite sure about that.
Thank you for that, Annie. Yes.
Kira Kimball, thanks for being here today. I appreciate your comments on educating the public about the best ways to serve the homeless community. But in thinking about the nonprofits and the governmental agencies who also serve, how are we equipping them with cultural competence, with unconscious bias and implicit bias educational training? We know since a major majority of these folks who identify as homeless are from the indigenous population, according to Annie's statistics. I think I heard from the chief as well, indigenous immigrant individuals coming from different cultural backgrounds. It's so important that we provide that education. So talk a little bit about those strategies.
I think the biggest step that was identified in regards to that was encouraging the council and the mayor to say, when we go out for this contract for services, that this has to be an aspect of it. We've never really taken a position on that before. I think it's always kind of been maybe talked about a little bit here and there, but it's been talked about pretty openly here that we have a disproportionate number of individuals in our community who are Native American that are homeless. Now, do we have other segments of our population as well that we need to do further education on? Absolutely. I think one of the key pieces here is the Helpline Network of Care. Collaborating on that can create some trust between agencies that will allow for some of those conversations to happen, where conversation right now simply isn't happening. And so I don't have a great answer of, hey, here's the curriculum that we're going to use, but I think raising the conversation and saying, we've got to talk about this. For example, in Sioux Falls, Native American graduation rate, 40%. Unacceptable. Let's talk about it, and let's discuss what the different aspects are that are impacting it. Let's create collaboration that'll create some of those conversations that might get some agencies talking that haven't talked before.
Good question, Kira. Thank you.
And I would just piggyback on that real quick. Sorry, I know you have a question. But I think we've left it to each agency to train their folks on cultural competency, trauma-informed care, those kinds of things. Eventually, what I would like to see is that we have a whole community-wide or even statewide boot camp for our frontline staff so that we can all be trained and delivering services in similar ways so that we can have more consistency. But that's pie in the sky.
Eric?
Thank you. Eric Ellison. I want to say first and foremost, thank you very much for your efforts here. I do think it's been said, but this is definitely not a silver bullet solution. This is obviously a very wide problem and multiple challenges along the way. My question comes back to a statistic that you said, which was 78%, I believe, of the homeless population that we've identified as Native American. Rich, to your point, my question is, how much are the tribal leadership actually coming to the table on this, or are they at all? Are there conversations at that level to be able to form partnerships to be able to solve this, as opposed to just one singular entity or a group of close-knit entities amongst city, county, and maybe some organizations in Sioux Falls?
Experience with that?
I'm going to go first for you.
Well, I can hit on the
Go.
statewide. So the statewide efforts are, I would say they're a little disjointed. It's hard to get the groups together, and for good reason. But I think we have a lot of work to do there yet.
Yeah, I'll be even more frank, is that it's broken. And it's not just broken in Sioux Falls, but it's broken statewide in the communication that's happening between Sioux Falls and the rest of the state. Let me give you a quick 30-second example. Dealing with a 7-year-old child right now that goes to one of our schools here in Sioux Falls, supposed to be going to one of our schools here in Sioux Falls, Native American child. I've been working with Child Protective Services with this individual, trying to get, hey, this child's not going to school. Child Protective Services doesn't want to do anything because child might go back up to reservation tomorrow afternoon. And so Child Protective Services isn't getting involved because they're like, well, it might be here, might not be here, and we've got too much else going on. You know who's impacted by that? A 7-year-old. That 7-year-old child, the trajectory that they're set on because of our broken system, city and statewide, we're setting that child for a future that no one should be set up for. So we need conversation statewide on this specific issue. And to be very frank and transparent, I don't know exactly the perfect step to take on that front. I do believe SDSU has the potential to be at the front of that conversation for us and the leadership that could be provided.
Last word, Dr. Kremeska.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Van. One, I want to thank everybody for enough people for supporting Amendment B. I think that's an opportunity, hopefully, to provide, especially some of the mental health, behavioral health things for the folks that are on the marginalized side of the thing. So thank you for that. I was going to bring up, I read something very briefly the other day, and I only bring it up for somebody to research, but that Oregon actually a little bit more progressive than us, and I won't apologize for that one way or the other. But Oregon actually has something in their Medicaid expansion about the first 6 months of homelessness to get people back in. And how they included that, I don't know. I just thought it might be worthy of taking a look. My real question was the Veterans Mini Home Project for homelessness. Can you give us any updates on that or perspectives? I don't know very much. But,
Well, I drove by it the other day. It looks nice. You know, it's coming together. So I was involved in that from the beginning, and I think this is a great example of how we solve issues and look at issues. And it was from a city leadership group, a bunch of, well, a cop, a city engineer, a lawyer, planning and development, somebody from the city council. We looked at it and like, well, what's some ideas and how does that work for Sioux Falls? Because we talk about what's happening in other parts of the country and what other programs are there, but keep in mind we're unique too. And I think that's coming on grounds broken. It was years in the making to get to that point. It really is a community-based wraparound care with case management, kind of what we envision, just in different ways for different groups of people within town. So to see that come in, and I'm excited for that program to get going and to see what that can branch into other areas and gain some positive momentum. But really, it was such a collaborative approach between government, private entities to really make an impact. I think that's what we need to see with all these issues going forward. Again, collaboration, not working in our silos, and not just patting ourselves on the back, but reaching our hands out to other people to really make an impact in those areas. So again, that's keep an eye on that. I think they're just getting ready to start building. They've got the groundwork done when I drove by. They have a lot of exciting things going on out there.
If you missed it, last week's program was included in that a bit of a discussion about the tiny home project for veterans, and it's on YouTube. Annie, Rich, Chief, thank you for your contributions today, and thank you for serving on the task force, and we look forward to hearing more from the City Council. Please give these guys a round of applause.
I'd also like to extend my gratitude to all of you for your leadership and, quite honestly, your courageousness to be tackling this the way that you have. I truly believe that when we know more, we can do more. And I'm so proud that all of us are going to leave here today knowing more. And that's because of all of you. So thank you for that. Looking ahead to next week, November 21st, USDA Climate Smart Grant to improve South Dakota farming. I hope everyone just has a wonderful week. Rotary is adjourned.